Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood law gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you are watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. I am very excited for another great conversation, especially celebrating the 85th anniversary of Batman. Andy and Lindsay are here. Lindsay, it is so wonderful to have you back again.
Great to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like, is this going to be a regular thing? I'm not quite sure. And Andy, it's always a pleasure to talk Batman and anything comic books with you as well.
Yes, very happy to be here. Hi, everybody.
So we've already tackled Batman Year One. Andy, I don't know if you ever watched the video, and I don't know what your thoughts were about it, but along with embracing some of the classic Batman stories that a lot of people know and especially love, it's also very important that we still tackle the here and now because we know that there are amazing stories about Batman from the past, but we have still been getting some truly great Batman stories over the last recent couple of years. One of the first times that Andy and I ever recorded a discussion about comic books together was the discussion of Jeff Johns and Jason Fabok's Batman the Three Jokers, which is a really great story. And there's still great Batman stories coming out even now. And we're hoping to tackle some of those as well. But today, we're going to be talking about a book that came out back in 2003, so just a year ago. And it was a book that a lot of people were very excited about, not just because it was Batman, but it was just because of the fact that there was a certain name that was attached to this book. And there's a whole history behind this book as well. But tonight we're going to be discussing probably one of my personal favorite books of 2023, Batman and the Joker, The Deadly Duo, written and drawn by the living legend that he is, a name that I know from my childhood, the great Marc Silvestri. So I heard about this book when it was coming out, and I got very excited knowing that Marc Silvestri would attach. But I think the most interesting thing for me was the fact that I don't even recall the last time I saw anything that Marc Silvestri had actually written. When I think of Marc Silvestri, I think of his artwork. I think of his great issues of X-Men. I think of names like Cyberforce, as well as some of the creations that were brought to life with his Top Cow people like Witchblade and the Darkness and all those other great names that a lot of people know. So I was really curious to see, is he just as good of a writer as he is an artist? And I'm just going to flat out start off the conversation by saying, yes, he is. This is a fantastic book. And also just beware, this is also a DC Black Label book. So it's not for young readers, people. So I know that you mothers and fathers who are comic book fans out there do want your kids to follow in your footsteps, but give them a couple of years to read this little one. Andy, just your overall consensus in just a couple of words. What did you think of this book?
It looks really beautiful. Um, yeah, it looks really beautiful. That's my main takeaway. I will not
Okay.
go too much deeper than that right now. Yeah.
All right. And Lindsay,
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah, the art was beautiful. The writing was strong. I had a great time reading it. It's one of my favorite Batman comics now.
so that's where I really wanted to tackle this first, just because of the fact that Marc Silvestri is a name that I pretty much know very well. Andy, it's a name I know you know very well. But Lindsay, this is your very first time discovering this specific individual in the world of comics. So I really wanted to hear your thoughts as pretty much the most artistic person in the room. I wanted to know your thoughts about this book from an artist perspective. And being that this is your very first exposure to Marc Silvestri, I know that you're really diving into comics now, and some of the Batman comics that you have read have very diverse art styles. But I would really like to hear your thoughts about Marc Silvestri's work just because of the name that he is and how much his art has been praised for like the last 4 decades.
Yeah, so like you said, this is my first time really experiencing his art and his work as a writer. And I was just really amazed by his art, and I took some notes, so I'm looking at my phone for the notes that I took. What stood out to me the most was his shading style, which I looked it up, and I think it's called a crosshatch technique. Which he didn't have to do this. He could have just kept the shading in, and the art would have been stunning anyway. But he took the time to also like do this like crosshatch technique where he draws in lines for all of his shadows, and that must have taken a very, very long time. And it really paid off. It really matched the vibe of Gotham really well, I thought. And it was just really stunning to look at. So that stood out to me the most for his art. I also really liked some of the other techniques that he used. Like there's like a few panels where Batman is popping out of the panel, and I thought that was a really good use of space and really illustrated the action. And then there were a few panels that I just like remember being very memorable, like the panel where Joker, it's his first appearance in the story, and there's like lightning and rain in the background, and you can just kind of hear it. And then another panel where Bruce is saying that he's going to find Gordon no matter what, and he's standing in front of his fireplace, and there's fire in his eyes, and that was just a really beautiful image as well. And then it's a smaller detail, but it's something I really appreciated. It's my last note about all the art. And so when it comes to narration boxes, I am newer to comics, and sometimes I get confused on who's speaking. But here it was clear. I never had to question it. He did this little detail where wherever it was Batman speaking, it was a bat symbol in the corner. Where whenever it was Joker, there was a little card symbol, and so I just always knew right off the bat, pun intended, who was talking. So anyway, just I love the art. I love everything about it. Those were the main things that stood out to me, and it was just a really a treat to see everything.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Marc Silvestri is I love that you specifically mentioned the fact that there were certain images where Batman was literally leaping out of the panel. And that's one of the reasons why, if you just to give a little bit of history to everybody about Marc Silvestri, he was in a very interesting spot going into the early 90s when at that time he was doing a lot of artwork for Marvel Comics, specifically X-Men. And it was the time when Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld had also come to Marvel and started doing all of their artwork. Also names like Will Spertasio and Scott Williams. And they all looked up to Marc Silvestri for his work. And this was also the time when there was a lot of head honchos over in Marvel that were saying to these guys, as well as a couple of others, that we don't like what you're doing. Like they say, we think you're doing this a little too dark, or we don't like the fact that you're breaking the panel board. Like these guys were doing so many brand new things that had never been done in comics. And because of the fact that they were getting so much pushback, that's the reason why Marc Silvestri and the other guys that a lot of people know decided to just get up, leave Marvel, and go to Image Comics and just make their own companies. And after that was done, the sky was the limit. Every character that was brought to the table by a creator was owned by that creator. The main founders created their own little boutique comic companies like Top Cow, which is still a Marc Silvestri name. Marc Silvestri is still very much part of Image Comics. He is one of the higher ups, along with Todd McFarlane and Jim Valentino and Eric Larson. These are all the founders. So the fact that there was a time when artists couldn't go in these kinds of directions, to know that we were at a place like that is so strange when you take a look at comics that are being made today and how truly incredible artwork can be. It can be as simple as the artist wants or as complex, but there's so much breathing room in terms of art talent. And the fact that Marc Silvestri is still doing this to this very day is a heartwarming thing to know, because if it wasn't for Image Comics, he was planning on leaving. And that's a sad thing to think about, knowing that he almost left the world of comics because he was just tired with it. He just felt it was so boring and he just wasn't going anywhere. But Image gave him that spark that he wanted for so long. And look at where he is now. And the fact that he still goes back to the big two from time to time, in this case is one of them, that he's still given the opportunity to do what he's doing because they know he's just one of those truly great artists. So to give him the opportunity to do a Batman story, not only draw it, but also write it, you can't get more praise than that.
I also want to jump in and say, Steve, I think it's a good time to mention what was the name of that great Image Comics documentary that we watched?
The
Because it's a
Image
natural.
Revolution.
Okay, because it's a natural for anyone who's interested, based on what Steve just said, to check that out. It's a really great piece of history that a lot of people lived. It's not that long ago, but it's a really, really cool watch to give you insight into that kind of, indie revolution of artists kind of taking taking ownership of their own creations. Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, Marc Silvestri is a legend, and I think that was a really good overview right there. When I think Marc Silvestri, I think of some of my favorite books. I think of The Darkness. I love Darkness, and I think that you see his style dripping from the page in this kind of like high contrast, gritty, but like still fantastic, real kind of lived in take on Gotham is a very Marc Silvestri thing. And I really, really enjoyed it. It's important for me to say I did think this book was good, not great. So I just want to like set the stage with that. This is not me saying that it was bad. I do think at the end of the day, I'd end up recommending this book still. But just to make it known, I'm probably not going to be as glowing as you guys might be, is what it sounds like. But I still enjoyed myself immensely. And I was still really excited to see Marc Silvestri go back to Batman. How long has it been since he had done a DC comic? I was
Oh
trying to look
God,
that
I
up
can't even.
recently,
I
but
don't
it's been
think
a
he.
long time.
You want to know what the truth is, Andy? I don't think he ever did a DC comic before.
Definitely not writing at the very least, right?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing that you said, Andy, I actually also want to say off the bat that I don't think that this is the best Batman story either. But I will say, if there's one thing that I love about this book, besides the fact that it's gorgeous, it's fun. It's a
Hmm.
fun, entertaining story. I mean, I think that Batman purists are never going to call this as good as like Alan Moore's Killing Joke or Frank Miller's Dark Knight
Yeah.
Returns, but it's going to go up there as one of the most loved and appreciated Batman stories in history. I mean, considering where Batman is right now in his current Batman run that Chip Zdarsky is writing, this just was a breath of fresh air for people that were just not enjoying Batman at the time. And there's a lot of people that are not caring much for Ram V's Detective Comics run right now. I personally love it. I think it's so unique, and especially the fact that it really has the Gothic feel, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. But when you get a mini series like this one, and you get a great, entertaining story, it's not deep, it's not complex, and even in a world where everyone constantly says we're living in a Joker heavy world, this is a great story featuring the Joker, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we'll get into my
Absolutely.
thoughts on it as we talk about the meat of the story and all of that. But I really do want to focus on the praise right here. And that really is very clear. Marc Silvestri truly is a legend. And I loved the art in these books. And I think that alone is worth the price of admission. So with no reservations, I can simply lay praise upon the book for that reason.
Yeah. So let's just basically get into the main plot of this story. So basically, it starts with Harley, and she's been kidnapped. And all of a sudden, before we know it, we get something that we never thought that we would ever see, or was it something that we've all been dying to see, you know? And it's the fact that the Joker needs Batman's help and he wants to team up with Batman. So I would love to hear from the both of you because, Andy, you have had the Batman Bedtime Story Hour with your dad way back in the day, and you have seen so many comics that have featured the Batman and Joker dynamic, but just curious to know your thoughts on the fact that Batman and Joker teamed up in this book, and more importantly, how did you feel about how Batman handled the situation?
I felt it was fine. What I thought about the team up aspect to it was that it was it was a little contrived to get to the story that wanted to be told, which I can accept that. You know, it's like we want to see a Batman Joker team up story. It's going to be tricky to see that. So I'm just like going to kind of allow for that so that we can be at the heart of the tale. Um, I think the idea of doing it um, was clearly by like the various tests that were set for, you know, Joker, but for Batman, was to get us to reflect on, you know, what Batman's code means, both in terms of his heroism for himself, as well as the external effects of his actions on society. Um, those are not necessarily new concepts, right? Like those are things that we kind of look at a lot in Batman stories, like Batman not crossing the line. Like we do that a lot. Um, but it was interesting to have it be, you know, we talk about Joker like he's this foil for Batman, right? So it was interesting to me that the way that we did that was through here's how Joker would do it, kind of, at least with the train scene. That was kind of like what we got to. Um, did I feel it was effective? Um, I'm not sure. And that's only because at the end of the day, I did kind of feel like Batman could do it without Joker. Um, and I did feel that in order to kind of explore the theme that it seemed like was trying to be talked about, um, it might have been better if there was a way to write it so that Batman truly needed Joker in the team up scenes. But it really felt more like Joker needed Batman,
Yeah,
which I think makes the theme fall a little flat. However, and we'll get into it when we talk about much later in the story, I do think there's still value in the Joker needs Batman side of things, which I think worked better than the Batman needs Joker side of things. But it was fun to see. I have a couple complaints with it, but again, like good, not great. I'm just saying, like I enjoyed that for what it was. I just think that there might have been more artful ways to explore some of those themes. But I was along for the ride and I enjoyed it and it was fun.
yeah. I mean, what I personally really appreciate about this book is that there's a great bunch of moments. Like there's just some moments that you really get into it. And there's also a lot of appreciation for the legacy of Batman. I mean, there was one point very early in the story that I absolutely loved. And it was the scene where Batman is getting Joker into the Batmobile. It's not just all the funny things that Joker's saying. And let me tell you, he says a lot of stuff in that scene that makes me laugh. But when Batman says atomic batteries to power, turbines to speed, my heart melted. I said, thank you, Mark. That is exactly what I wanted to hear because that is Adam West Batman. That was such a wonderful thing to see in that moment. I was so thrilled with that. Another thing that I really appreciate about this book is the fact that Marc Silvestri knows how to keep a story like this compact because there were so many times where you really thought the plot can go in so many different directions, especially considering the cast of characters that is in this story. There's a lot of big Batman names that are featured in this story. Some you didn't even expect to see, like I did not anticipate seeing Catwoman. But personally, I really didn't know really if her purpose was really necessary in the story, but the fact that she was there was very interesting. There was room for Nightwing, there was room for Alfred, there was even some really great moments with Detective Bullock. So there's so many great characters here, and yet Marc Silvestri just knew how to keep himself focused on the main story that he was trying to tell, even though there were so many details to this story, he still knew how to keep everybody focused. And I really commend him for that.
Yeah, I'd point out Bullock in particular. I thought was really well handled. But you're right, there was a good chance, and I think it's one of those things where it's like you get the chance to draw the cast, right? So obviously we all love Jim Gordon. It's great to be able to include him as relevant to the plot, to get to draw him having, you know, a little bit of his scene too, especially near the end. There was a lot of aside from our known characters, there was a lot of Marc Silvestri darkness like all over the created characters as well. He kind of wrote himself into his comfort zone a little bit. Granted, I mean, Batman is a great vehicle for that, for what he likes to do. So it was very natural. But I think just to build on what you said, Steve, which I think is exactly right, I think equally he did seem to use this as an opportunity to do a little bit of his own lore, which I think is exactly what Black Label is great for.
Yes.
To be able to kind of do that and explore that and kind of write these bigger stories that might not have had a home elsewhere. So I was very, very, very pleased to see his take on the characters, like literally to see his take on the characters, as well as to see what he decided to do with the Batman universe with the freedom that Black Label affords.
Right. And Lindsay, there's a lot of some of your favorite Batman characters are in this story. So as someone who I know who you're a fan of, how did you feel about the representation of some of these characters? Like, did you feel that they got enough time? Do you feel that Marc Silvestri wrote them well? Do you think he could have done anything better with some of these characters? Because like I said, the whole scene with Catwoman, like, I am okay. I will say that the little innuendo that she says to Nightwing is kind of funny. Like, I really thought that was really, really funny. But again, that's another thing I loved about Marc Silvestri, the comedy that he put into this, because even though it's a very dark story, he did know exactly where to bring us back and just give us a little bit of lightheartedness. But I'm trailing off here. So how did you feel about some of the representation of some of your favorite characters in this story?
Yeah, so I think overall the representation was great. And I agree that like it was great to see so many main Batman characters featured, but without taking away the focus of the main plot. To answer your question, I think the Joker's personality really shone through in this comic. He had some great lines of dialogue. Like I think my favorite was like, "Are there any snacks in this backpack? Like you have to have snacks on like a superhero adventure," and I thought that was fun. And then I thought Catwoman's personality really shone through here too. Um, so Nightwing is one of my favorite characters. I feel like he was a little flat here,
I
to
agree.
be honest. Yeah,
Yeah, I
which is a
mean,
little disappointing.
yeah, I mean, there are so many times when, like, I will give you a great example. It's like, I don't know if either of you have seen, I think one of the best animated Batman films ever made, Batman Under the Red Hood. Yeah, so Nightwing is in this movie for a very, very small amount of time, and Neil Patrick Harris does his voice. And he does very, very well. When Nightwing is in the film, it's great. But one of my biggest gripes about the film, even though it's one of my all-time favorites, I think they got rid of Nightwing in that story a little too quickly. I really wanted more from him. Oh yeah, I completely forgot that scene where Batgirl showed up. Like, oh my god, Batgirl's here too. You know, I did not anticipate seeing her either.
Me neither. That was a really cool surprise. She had a great
Oh
entrance.
yeah, I mean, the only thing I was trying to figure out, Andy, maybe you can help me on this one, because Marc Silvestri really played with the fans in that specific scene. Was he trying to confuse us? Like, is she showing anger because of what he did to her in The Killing Joke? Or is this something completely different?
Yeah, I think he was intentionally playing with the reader in that scene, because I did have the same thought. So I think it was less like planting a flag, and more just like imply, because there was a little of the composition in that scene that implies the Killing Joke. So I think he was kind of just like tugging on what the reader might take from that. The important thing is there's an intense amount of animosity between the two of them, and they accomplished that. All the thing that he accomplished was showing that correctly. I'd also take this as an opportunity to say, while thinking through the characters that were spotlighted in it, I did really like his take on Harley. I think that we've been seeing a lot of different takes on Harley and Joker recently. And this was one that felt very like it felt like a very coming home take on the dynamic between the two of them. Again, like that Black Label affords being able to shed a little bit of history where it benefits. And so I really enjoyed Harley's inclusion in the story. And basically the entire way she was written, very, very funny, very cool, and just a joy to the fans getting to see him do the character.
Yeah, there's so many great moments in this story that does bring you back to so many different things in the world of Batman. I mean, let's get into the main focus of the story. So basically, the reason why Joker is teaming up with Batman is, of course, to get Harley, but there's something else afoot. And the fact that there are all of these super zombie like Jokers running all over Gotham. And it reminds me of that scene in Hush when the Joker says, I know this is hard to believe, but I'm innocent. Because there are all these Joker lookalikes, but Joker's not doing anything that they're doing. So it leads Batman and Joker down this extremely bizarre rabbit hole to uncover exactly what's going on and how it's connected to something from the past that actually Joker was a part of and Batman was a part of. And this brand new villain basically says that both of them, in some way, are responsible for the misfortunes that took place in that time in the past. So it pretty much starts off with the encounter, and then they go back to the Batcave. And then comes the part that I was talking to Lindsay about before we turned on the camera. The way that they locked the Joker up in the Batcave, that's an image that will be imprinted on me for the rest of my life with the gimp mask. It's so like I was saying this jokingly to Lindsay off camera. I was like, either Batman really knows what to do when it comes to keeping crazies like the Joker in his secret domain, or he has some crazy fetish that we don't know about yet.
Yeah, I thought that was great. And I was really, it was really nerve-wracking. Like I should say, like having Joker in the Batcave for that
Yeah.
extended period of time, and like Dick just like falling asleep too while he's there. Like I was really like on the edge of my seat with all of that, and I was like, this just feels like a terrible idea. Like beyond purely the team up with the Joker. Like it really was brought to a point when he was in the Batcave where I was like, this could go sideways a million ways. Like, and
Well,
I just felt
again,
very uncomfortable the entire time, which I know is exactly how it was designed to be. So that's great. But like it
yeah.
made for a very unpleasant 15 minutes I guess,
Well,
of my
that's
life.
Marc Silvestri. If there's
Yeah.
one thing that Marc Silvestri does, is he knows how to captivate his readers, even though he mostly does the artwork. But in almost all of his stories that he's been attached to, we always get those specific. I mean, like, I mean, is it wrong to say that this story had a lot of Image Comics moments?
100%. And I think you see that in, you know, and not that this is like unique to Image, and it may sound like prosaic what I'm gonna say, but like the bigger like stylized fight scenes really felt very Image to me, and major like board. I would say the big like wedding set piece that we go back to in flashback feels very Image to me too. The Baroque but it's beset from all sides kind of scene with the cops waiting in the woods. There's just something very kind of to use an overused word, like over the top gritty to it that like really felt like 90s image to me, of like this is going to be not over the top in terms of like aliens and violence, but like over the top in terms of like capital R romantic, like really kind of like what is this, like beset from all sides and this is going on, wow, there's a wedding happening, and like there's, it was very 90s to me in a very good way, in a very good way. But yeah, you could feel the image DNA coming through the entire thing. And then, you know, I say not like aliens or supernatural, but like we do get like this like underground fight scene against a horde of zombies, right? Like how much more image can you get than
No,
that?
you get a
So I
little bit of
felt it on every
everything.
page.
You definitely get a little bit of everything in this book, and that's what always makes a very entertaining read. Lindsay, I was actually curious about your overall thoughts on the book, especially because of the fact that it was a DC Black Label book. I mean, we wanted to definitely get you into the Batman comics, and I mean, there are some Batman stories that can be very, very disturbing. And there definitely were some disturbing images here, especially when we had those typical moments where, like, certain people were receiving specific packages and then you see what's inside the package. So I was saying to myself while I was reading this, I was like, oh my God, I hope Lindsay's okay with this because we don't want to give her anything too crazy. But I'm hoping that you were okay with some of the things that happened in those moments.
I want to jump in very, very quick
Yeah.
because Lindsay, I really want to hear your thoughts, but I just realized to level set for, I think we've talked with you about it at least, Lindsay, but to level set for anyone watching who doesn't know, just since we've mentioned Black Label a few times.
Yes.
So this is like a side imprint by DC, that's more quote unquote mature. It just means that they can go with your PG-13 to R kind of imagery and storylines in a way that they don't in their flagship titles, combined with they're like inherently non-canon stories. So they give writers kind of the freedom to do a mini series with kind of the version of Batman or however they want to portray the characters without needing to worry about how it fits into 1,000 issues of Detective Comics, without needing to worry about what part of like crisis or universes we are now in or which world, you know, count we are up to. So just to level set there, that's what Black Label is. And I realize we've mentioned Black Label a few times without ever actually defining it in this episode. So sorry about that. Now I'm shutting up. Lindsay, I'd love to hear what you wanted to say. I just thought that was important context. Shutting up.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for including that context because I wasn't exactly sure what Black Label was either. To answer your question, Steve, there were some disturbing images, but I was okay. So yeah, thanks for checking in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to like gore and things like that, and more disturbing images, I think in terms of this story, there was like a storyline and a purpose behind it. They weren't just like throwing things around for the shock value. So I
Yeah.
think for that reason I was okay with it. So
Yeah, because it was also really funny because the whole situation with Jim Gordon. I mean, first of all, when you see what's going on with Jim Gordon, the first thing that comes to my mind is, oh, Jim, not again. It happened again. Like, why does he always get like the raw end of the stick? He always ends up in the worst situations, especially when the Joker is involved. And I'm like reading on and I'm just trying to say to myself, what's he doing there? There's got to be a reason for this. Because if there was one of the plot points that I felt that really kept me guessing was the whole situation with Jim Gordon. I mean, once again, the whole situation with him being kidnapped also reminded me a lot of the Killing Joke. But and then of course there were all of these tests that were being offered, like the whole thing with the two situations, like one will live, and that's, oh man, that scene where Batman decides to take Joker's place, those two parents that are like being hung from the ceiling and basically saying which one should die. That's right out of the Dark Knight film from Christopher Nolan. And then when he gives the answer, like, first of all, you can't believe that he actually gives the answer, but in the end, you understand why. But Jim Gordon, the whole thing was still so strange. And then, of course, getting Batgirl into it only made it more intense. But then we see that he was actually a part of the whole thing that brought the Joker and Batman together as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's a few things to pick up on there. Um, One is that you see, and we've mentioned even in the composition of it, but we mentioned with Barbara's inclusion, like reference to Killing Joke. You mentioned reference to Dark Knight. Um, and I do see this as Marc Silvestri's kind of love letter to Batman, right?
Definitely.
So you can see like you can see the history of the character and where he's coming from and where the inspirations lie. And so then what versions of Batman matter to him, right? And which tells you what kind of Batman story we're reading. Um, it does go into one of my, you know, kind of, you know, criticism, if not complaint about the book, is that I did find derivative is way too harsh. But I did have some difficulty finding where like it had its own voice unique from Batman stories that I have read before. Granted, we just had a long conversation that was a lot of fun, and people should go watch if they're interested. Long conversation about the history of the Batman character, and inherent in that is a celebration of the fact that the character's been around for a long time. People have explored a lot of facets of these characters. Um, and so I'm tempted to not knock points for feeling that I've seen a story before. But it was interesting. It was intentionally kind of offering it up as an homage at times. But others I just kind of felt like this was Marc Silvestri really wanting the chance to tell a story that's a little bit been told before at times, but taking the chance to do it while he's got the reins. And it kind of gets smoothed over by the incredible art. And so even if I've kind of seen something before, love to see him do it. It's the same reason why I like adaptation, but a little bit more, you know, nuanced, clearly. But just it's kind of a natural point to mention that. So I will not slam and critique every single individual scene because that's not what I'm here to do. And I really don't want to take away from the fact that I genuinely did enjoy the book when all was said and done.
He's gonna say that
But
all night,
you know,
everybody.
we're just in that moment of like one of the things that like was on my mind while I was reading it. So I had to point it out. But
So
again,
this is where we get some of the brand new characters. By the way, Master Bruce, do you have anything to say?
Bruce enjoyed the story too.
I had a feeling he would.
Yeah, he obviously has some things he has some points he wants to make. So
Yeah, I'm only gonna call him Master Bruce when we discuss Batman. It's only appropriate. So we are introduced to a couple of new characters as this unfolds because we learn about how the Joker zombies were created, and we learn about this very well-known philanthropist named Sim. And he was also part of the reason why Batman and the Joker are in this predicament. And it turned out we get the whole backstory. Basically, this man's daughter, Amanda, was going to be getting married, and there was a big wedding happening. It was with Gotham's elite being invited. And then, of course, what just happens to happen? The Joker decides to run amok and he starts to cause chaos, and he's basically here to do what he normally does. And then, of course, Batman comes in to stop him, and Gotham City Police comes in to stop him too. And in the end, we unfortunately get tragedy, and we find out that Amanda is killed. And that is where the story really starts to take its shape, because we find out that one of the things that her father had been trying to do was resurrect the dead. And we have seen this happen a couple of times in the world of Batman. We know about the infamous Lazarus pits, thanks to Ra's al Ghul. We all know what they did. But then when we go back to the story Batman Under the Red Hood, which is why I was actually referencing it earlier today, what did he try to do for the first time with Jason Todd? He tried to resurrect the dead. Not make the person youthful, but bring the person back to life. And it didn't go the way that everyone wanted it to go. And Jason Todd is now alive, still going under the alias of the Red Hood, but he's not the same Jason Todd before, ironically, the Joker beat him to death with a crowbar. So now we see that this man is also trying to resurrect the dead through his science research, putting a lot of money into the operation. And it turns out that Amanda is alive, and she is now doing what she wants to do the most. And this is where I say this could have been so complex. This story could have gone in so many directions. And in the end, it's a story about revenge. She wanted to get Batman, the Joker, and Jim Gordon in a room together so she could have her way. And that's basically who it was. And again, the artwork on Amanda Sims, she is beautifully drawn, and that's one of the few things that Marc Silvestri and the men and women at Top Cow did best. Going to reference the Image Revolution documentary, Top Cow was like the Ferrari, the Gleamy, like the very fancy. So they would create female characters with a ton of sex appeal, but they meant business. Like these were beautiful women that could tear grown men apart with their bare hands. And Amanda Sims is no different. Even though she's undead, she still looks too beautiful to a degree, and you know she's going to kill you. So that's one of the few reasons why I also think that that's one of the biggest strengths that Marc Silvestri has as an artist. But now, as a writer, he can write a pretty good, deep villain when he tries.
Mhm. Yeah, and you could really see the kind of darkness witchblade pedigree in the character. It's especially at the bitter end. I forget if they called it an epilogue or if it was just the end of the last book. But you could really see all of that dripping there, and it was almost like he needs to come back to like his chicken soup kind of thing, where it's like, now this is a character I can do, right? And sure as shit, he's right. So I do think that cool looking character, cool written character. I talked a little bit about the scene like at the wedding and all of that, the kind of beset on all sides thing, the very image nature of that before. Um, and you know, it's interesting that that's probably one of the bigger moments in the story that I do feel was like a touch quote unquote contrived. The blame. I think we need to accept a lot of the negativity came from the process, obviously, of the resurrection in order to blame Jim Gordon and Batman just as much as we're blaming the Joker and the rest of the Gotham Police Department for what happened. Um, but you know, putting that aside, there's just like an element of like that Silvestri, like dark, vengeful woman character that he's really great at drawing. That it's a reason to have that character, and it works. It was cool. I liked it. Even if the way we got there wasn't maybe as fully fleshed out as I might have seen from a similar story in the Darkness. But nevertheless, really enjoyed that.
Now, speaking of darkness, I want to bring this to the both of you. What Batman and the Joker encounter when they finally meet Amanda Sims, and we see what she also tried to recreate. Too much, or was it exactly what we expected? And I'm referring to all of the guests of the wedding, and some of them with kids on spike, like Vlad
Yeah,
the Impaler.
I mean, here, this is going to, you know, we had our little discussion about like Black Label, right? It's like, yes, Mark, you can do that here, if that's what you want to do. I felt that it was, I felt, I don't know if you guys have watched Smiling Friends. I felt that was tastefully done. Yeah, I thought it was actually kind of like tastefully done in that it was the exact level of like Baroque Gothic, completely over the top thing that we were going for. So it wasn't gratuitous, despite the fact that it was inherently incredibly gratuitous. So I thought it was cool, and it let him draw what he wanted to draw. And I think if there was any place where you're going to do that, it was going to be within this particular miniseries. So, yep.
But you know what? It's also really funny because like I could hear Lindsay when she's reading these pages. She's like, "Oh God, this is very, very disgusting." But oh my God, the art is so beautiful. I can't look away from that. This is just absolutely gorgeous. But you see, that's Marc Silvestri for you. You know, he and all the other people of Image, like he also taps into Batman's rogues gallery perfectly, even though Amanda Sims is not part of his rogues gallery yet. But what is the thing that we know about Batman's rogues gallery? Oh, it is all about presentation and the theatrics. So you shouldn't expect anything less, even from a villain that we've never even encountered before. Lindsay, what do you have to say? I want to hear your piece.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Amanda Sims as a villain. And are we good to like talk about spoilers in the video, by the way? Very end of the
Absolutely.
story. Okay.
This
Yeah,
book is a year old. People who are Batman fans should have read this already.
yeah. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing hopefully we see another comic with her and like where her story takes us and like what her villain name might end up being. I would, but yeah, like you said, like the story went in different directions that we might not could have gone in many directions. At the end, I didn't expect her to just kind of let things go and leave. I expected her to be fully on this like, you know, revenge on Batman kind of mindset. But she's like, okay, you know, I'm going to see how you handle things from here on out, whether or not I go after you, it depends on what you do. And then she just leaves. And so I'm just kind of curious about like what she wants now that what she wanted fell apart. What does she want now? Um, and and then going back to like that scene with the heads on the spikes. Like I think when we got to that like recreation of the wedding scene, like the tone really shifted in a way that I didn't expect, but still kind of fit with like Gotham and Batman and everything. But I definitely felt like a oh, this is a little bit different than what I've seen before. Like disturbingly, but like also like I think the vibe, I mean, yeah, the vibe was very gothic and like kind of for some reason reminded me of the tea party scene in Arcane a little bit, if
Mm.
either of you have seen that. But yeah, that kind of vibe. And so yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. That when you get to that scene and you're introduced to Amanda Sims, you're absolutely right. Like the whole tone of the whole book just shifts. Like it gets really into the gothic and the theatrical and the supernatural, and it's just like wow. It's just you're like we were having a good time here, but now things just got kicked up to 11, and then it's the climax. And I think that when it comes to great writers out there are very, very few that, especially if they've been bringing people along for the ride and they've been enjoying themselves, not everybody can stick a landing. And I think that Marc Silvestri managed to do a pretty good job because we then get pretty much everything that we were hoping we were going to get towards the end of the story. We got the big epic fight, we got the big rescue, and even we finally get the fight between Batman and the Joker. It's just like, even though this is a team up book, I think everybody knew deep down inside, oh, we're not going to finish the story without Batman and Joker having a fight. Because, of course, this is the Joker. In the end, once he gets what he wants, which was his pudding, he got Harley back. Then, of course, all bets are off. And he officially, come on, like you saw it from a mile away, but you were excited to see how it was going to look because of the fact that Marc Silvestri was putting this story together.
Can I talk about the writing style a little bit?
Of course.
So from a writer's perspective, I'm learning that the plot of the story, like to keep the reader hooked, you have to reveal a little bit at a time, keep that mystery going. And I thought he did a really great job of this, like revealing the flashback a little bit at a time. And then also Batman seemed to know exactly what was happening, but you didn't know what he was thinking until maybe a few pages later. Like what is the key for
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Yeah.
No, that again, just for me, as someone who has known Marc Silvestri all these years, I was curious to see, like, it was like the same time when I picked up Twig #1 for the first time. Like, I knew Scotty Young as an artist, but I didn't know Scotty Young as a writer. And it turns out there's a lot of stuff that Scotty Young has wrote that I have not read. So I may have a little bit of catching up to do. But yeah, I enjoyed, I loved the artwork of the fight, especially the image where Batman knocks out a couple of Joker's teeth. And that brings me back to Batman Mask of the Phantasm when he knocks one of Joker's teeth out. And that, again, so many moments that are truly a love letter to the Batman lore as a whole in so many different ways. And I think that that's what makes this book, again, as you said earlier, Andy, not the best Batman story in the world, but truly likable, entertaining, it a good overall package. I mean, like I said earlier, it's not like some of the Batman stories that we had gotten before. Like, I don't think this is better than a book like The Killing Joke or something like that, but it's got its place. And I was going to talk about this towards the very end, Lindsay, but since you already brought it up, yeah, I mean, I'm curious to know if there will be more to this story, because me personally, now that I have seen Marc Silvestri do something like this, I would love to see him get more opportunities like this. You know, I mean, this book did sell. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the paperback is making a lot of money as we speak. A lot of people in the comic book community, especially people who love the big two and were just looking for something to sink their teeth into, they all praised this book, mostly for the art more than the writing, but they still very much enjoyed it as a whole. But yeah, I would be very curious to know if we will get more of Amanda Sims. Like you said, like, what's her villain name gonna be? It would be really cool if we could possibly see Marc Silvestri take on other DC characters. Like, will the next Batman story that he writes, is it a continuation of this? And will we see Superman? Like, will he draw Superman? Like, what will that be like? You know, because then you've got two other completely different dynamics working alongside each other. So this book definitely had a lot of potential to become something bigger. But honestly, if we never get another book of this story from Marc Silvestri, I'll still feel satisfied at the end.
Yeah, and I'd say that we've seen, I mean, Harley, we've seen Batman characters be pulled in from outside, the like mainline Batman canon comic, to appear and be used by other writers. So like I'd wonder if anyone would have interest in the Amanda Sims character aside from Marc Silvestri. I wonder what kind of rights he has to the character, considering at his core he's an Image guy, and that probably mattered to him. But whoever does it, I think there's room for the character. It's a really powerful character. She has a really like narrow desire in this story, but like at the end there, like she basically is like a, to use the wrong canon, Omega level threat, right? Is kind of how the character feels to me. So that's interesting. It's completely self-contained, does not need to be another one of these. Not everything needs to be a franchise or get sequeled out. Nevertheless, if Marc Silvestri wanted to return to Batman, tell another story, felt that there was something more to tell here, or if he wanted to take a stab at a different DC character, I'd be interested in reading it. I would. It's weird that how critical do I want to be? I I thought that this book was oddly wordy for what I expected was going to be something that he was going to write. I should add that in. I felt like there was a lot of especially when we were getting a little, I don't want to say convoluted, but getting very descriptive, when we all met up at the underground church recreation. There was like this page that was like 20% text, which was just like weird to see. And I mean, it's what he wanted to do, and it's his art. He can cover it up as much as he wants, I guess. But I did find that kind of strange. But I almost wondered when I was reading it, and I got the feeling that he was kind of like lore dumping his story, right?
Mm.
And that I wonder if he would feel more free in now returning to, whether it's the Amanda Sims character, another Batman story, or even a different DC hero, like with this kind of black label take on the stories. Because there was a little bit of a kitchen sink feel to this story to me. But like, he'd definitely be invited back, so I don't think he needed to take that approach. And I almost think that with the comfort that comes from doing this book, seeing that it had a positive reception, and feeling free. I mean, he keeps saying it, and it's true. He's a legend, and he can lean on that. But I think that there was a lot. There was like so much love for what he was doing that he did like kind of a lot. And I think that that means that there's great opportunity in the future, with what he might choose to do with this universe.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. The thing about this story is you definitely see that this is a character that Marc Silvestri loves, and getting this opportunity again, the fact that this story was one that he was trying to make reality for so many years, and the fact that DC just kept saying, no, 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 not yet, not yet. Well, like, when was it going to be his time? I mean, like, what was going to trigger it? Was like suddenly Rob Liefeld going to reach out and say, hey, I want to make a Flash miniseries for you guys. Like, that's never going to happen in a million years, by the way. I mean, I just find it very interesting knowing that, there's now two Image founders that have now given us artwork on Batman, because I'm going to mention another story that Lindsay absolutely loved. Jim Lee is the artist of Hush. So the fact that we have Jim Lee, who had done so much Marvel, I think Hush was his very first Batman story that he ever drew. So the fact that we had him on that one, and now we have another Image founder like Marc Silvestri, like, I know Todd McFarlane also recently wrote a Batman Spawn crossover book, so that was also pretty cool. I mean, I never thought that he would ever want to go back and do anything with the big two, but there he was. So, knowing that we get these guys that are actually time to time willing to come back and get an opportunity like this is always a wonderful thing. But like I said, if we never get another thing, we have this. It's here. It's for everybody out there to enjoy. It's a fun read, and I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it.
I have a question actually. Do you happen to know why DC was holding back this story?
Unfortunately, there are certain things that comic creators will never tell the tale of. I'll give you a great example. There was a comic book signing that I went to. Peter Tomasi was at my local comic shop, and I went to meet this guy. He did such an amazing job on Green Lantern back in the early 2000s alongside Jeff Johns. He also was writing Detective Comics not so long ago. And all of a sudden, they and it wasn't just Detective Comics. He and Dan Jurgens were writing the Superman comics during the Rebirth era. So all of a sudden, Superman, for example, all of a sudden DC just says, we're going to give the Superman titles to Brian Michael Bendis. And at one point in time when he was writing Detective Comics, he said, yeah, we're going to give this to a new writer. So he's not going to go into the details as to why the change was made. And just by hearing that alone, that gives me a little bit of an understanding of what exactly happened. And it probably wasn't pretty. So that's one of the gripes that a lot of, especially people that I see in the comic book community, has with a Marvel and a DC. It's that feeling, it's that corporate mentality that unfortunately drives especially older fans away from the classic books from Marvel and DC and towards the indie books and books like this one, because there are a lot of miniseries in Marvel and DC right now that are headlined by beloved names in the comic book industry. And even though they are only mini or maxi series, people will be gravitating to those now more often than the ongoing series, because the writers that are writing it and the artists that are drawing them, they're not as good as they used to be. Some exceptions, of course. I will say that right now, one of the best books in DC is Jeremy Adams' Green Lantern, followed closely by Philip Kennedy Johnson's Green Lantern War Journal. And that's a very underappreciated series. I've been reading it. It's a lot of fun. And on Marvel, there's like next to nothing in regards to the ongoing series that's interesting. Next to, ironically, again, Philip Kennedy Johnson, who's currently writing The Incredible Hulk. That's a great book. I am loving that ongoing series. But for me, I'm reading all of these mini series from DC and Marvel because it's great writers, great artists. And I'm just like, why aren't they writing the ongoing series right now? You know, why is Marc Silvestri only being tapped to write a 7-issue miniseries? I mean, I doubt he'd want to do an ongoing series these days. But you see the point that I'm making. The names and the talents that drive the industry are not doing what is needed to be done to drive the industry, especially when it comes to the big two companies, which is why Marc Silvestri was the one that said in the documentary, the industry of comics had never had a revolution, and he's not sure if it's ever going to happen again. I truthfully feel that in 2024, it could happen just because of what I'm currently seeing on the indie circuit all over again. But I could be wrong. We'll see how the rest of the year goes. We're still very much young into 2024. But I hope that answers your questions, Lindsay. Hopefully it wasn't too long-winded.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's something that I'm planning to share on this channel many, many more times already. I actually, if you guys haven't seen the video that I did on our channel with Bill over at Comic Book University, when we were talking about the state of comics, I talked about a lot of what was happening in the future of 2024. And we actually have gotten to those points. And I will say that now that those specific things that I mentioned that were coming, that are here, they're not disappointing. They're actually really, really good. But that's not what we're here to discuss. So yeah, Batman the Joker, the Deadly Duo, a great, exciting, and fun read. Not the best. I agree with you, Andy, but still, it's a great package and definitely one to enjoy. If anything, just gaze in the glory that is Marc Silvestri's artwork. It will blow your mind. So, Lindsay, you said one little thing before we turned on the camera. You said that this has officially shot up in one of your favorite reads of all the Batman that you have currently been reading.
That is true.
So
Hush was, yeah. So I've probably read maybe 10 Batman stories now, so I'm still fairly new. But Hush was definitely my favorite. And now this one is either tied with Hush or it could be number one now. I'm not sure, but it's definitely up there. I had a really great time reading it, and the art was just fantastic. So,
well, I'm very, very glad that I sort of pressed you guys, and I know that I hope that Cammy got a chance to read it as well, but it was something that I just kept saying, Andy. I even think before we even started putting all these videos together about Batman, I think this was one of the books I was telling you had to read. So, like I said, if anything, just because Marc Silvestri was the artist. But Lindsay, I gotta be honest, it's amazing to know that you enjoyed it as much as you did. I really wasn't sure what your take was going to be, but I'm glad you really enjoyed it. I'm really, really grateful for that.
thank you. Thanks for the recommendation.
No, not a problem. I'm looking forward to hearing what a couple more of your thoughts on your own channel when you talk about more of your reads. But guys, I think that's going to wrap up another great discussion about Batman, and I'm hoping everybody out there enjoyed. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave a like and a comment for us. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content. I know it's been a little bit slow, guys. There's a lot of things that have been going on that were unexpected on our ends, but we're definitely going to be back with some more Batman discussions, which means you'll be seeing a little bit more of Lindsay as well. And that's not a bad thing at all. So until then, everybody, we will see you in the next one.